Welcome to the Limitless Ladies Network, a women's holistic wellness podcast where our mission is to help women build holistic self-care. The following disclaimer applies to all episodes and content shared on this show. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Limitless Ladies Network or its affiliates. The information and advice provided on this podcast are for general educational purposes only and should not be considered as professional medical, nutritional, or therapeutic advice. The content shared on this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or health condition. Listeners are advised to consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to their diet, lifestyle, or health routine. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that you are aware of the limitations and potential risks associated with the information and advice shared on this show. You release and hold harmless Limitless Ladies Network, its hosts, guests, and affiliates from any liability for any damages, losses, or injuries that may result from the use of the information and advice provided on this podcast. Hello, and welcome to Limitless Ladies Network, where our mission is to help women build holistic self-care. In today's segment, I want to talk about the 4 life stages of ladies. You heard me correctly, 4 stages of our lives. Although it's not something that we all talk about, it sure would be helpful to know what we're dealing with, right? I can say that from my own experience, when asking upfront and impersonal questions to my OBGYN or my doctor's office, that I simply got the, yeah, you might have some of those symptoms, but there isn't really much that we can do for you. Possibly give you some cream, but that was about it. Yikes, right? So that was pretty frustrating. And I just wanted to take some time to go over some of the basics of what we go through all the stages so that we really have a really good understanding of what all of those stages are so that we can, navigate those a little easier. The first stage is what's called premenopause. So all of us pretty much know this by now. It's the first stage that we all run into when we become women. It is the hallmark sign that we've become a young lady and we are now menstruating. We all get really excited usually when this happens because it's our introduction to womanhood. Makes us feel older. This stage usually starts with our first period, generally beginning between the ages of 10 and 13, some even as young as 8 years of age. And that onset can actually be something that might be a little hereditary. That it could start similar to the age that your mom, basically, whether she started at, 10 or 13 years old, then you might similarly start around that very same time. So that gives you an idea. If you have a young daughter, then you can expect she's probably going to be starting around the same time that you did, give or take. As it is, we are all definitely unique people, so it could change. But that is a good kind of guide to go by. So during the early stages, the cycle and duration and flow are very irregular, right? You're trying to figure, they're just starting to come into womanhood and trying to get that cycle in a consistent flow. So there will be some inconsistencies as it goes through with the timing, the flow, meaning how heavy or how light it is, and the amount of time. Could be that you're only menstruating for 3 days, or maybe you're menstruating for up to 10 days. Maybe it starts out really heavy, gets to light, or vice versa. So there are variations. The overall time in premenopause, in some cases, can also be related to how long your mother remained within this stage as well, within her life. In some rare cases, ladies have actually had their period up until their mid-60s. But as a general kind of breakdown of this stage, I'll just go through the process, which most of us already know, but women's cycles are usually about 28, sometimes 30 days. And this, of course, can be different for each of us. But the first 1 to 13 days actually starts, the first day is your menstrual cycle, day 1. At this point, your period could last 3 to 8 days, could be, again, give or take from there, typically. Once that uterine lining has been removed, then also known as your period, then this lining begins to basically rebuild itself in anticipation of it receiving an egg. Around day 14, which is in the middle of that cycle, so we're going 28 days, halfway in between, about would be that 14-day ovulation. The eggs are released and then can be fertilized within a very short period of time. So those of you that are looking to conceive and or not to conceive a baby would want to focus in on that 14-day window, because you only really have 24 to 48 hours from the time that it's released to be able to fertilize that egg. Then after day 15-ish, again, once the ovulation happens and you have that small window, then from 15 to 28 is the luteal phase. This is when the uterus lining begins to thicken in anticipation of actually fertilizing that egg. If no egg is fertilized, then within that short window, it begins to break down, and then the cycle starts all over again. So because our bodies don't work in a vacuum, there actually is a feedback loop that happens between our bodies and our minds. The hormonal loop that goes on from the hypothalamus, located at the base of our brains, to the pituitary gland, which receives the signals and is attached to the hypothalamus, and down to the ovaries, the two small organs in our pelvic region, then back up to the hypothalamus and the brain. This loop occurs each month throughout menstruation. It's kind of the brain signaling what's happening in order for reproduction to happen. Then the next phase is our perimenopause phase, not perimenopause. And in this next stage of life, it is considered to be the beginning of the transition into menopause. This stage will show signs of fluctuations of hormones and the typical slow decline of our sex hormones, and what women typically will think of as those menopause symptoms. It's broken down really into two distinct phases: the early phase and the late phase or later phase. In the early phase, somewhere in the range of maybe your mid-30s, so 35, somewhere in there, fewer and fewer follicles are produced, reducing the likelihood of getting pregnant, but not eliminating it completely, so be cautious. As we progress through this stage, our hormones, such as the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, begins to increase production as a way of signaling back to the brain. Although monthly cycles can still be generally regular at this stage, it does start to become unpredictable. So the signs of perimenopause would be changes to what is a normal monthly cycle, such as shorter cycles occurring perhaps within a week or 2 weeks after you had your last period. So it's not that 14 or 28-day cycle. It actually could just be within a week of your last period ending. Totally throws you for a loop, right? Because you have no idea when you're going to need that next maxi pad to be able to catch what's coming. And some also experience a lot heavier bleeding at this time, and or it could just be spotting. So really, again, depends on each one of us. How do you know if you're in the early stage? Well, if you've skipped 2 or more periods in a row, then there's a 95% chance that you're already in the early stages of your perimenopause, and or menstrual cycles will most likely cease to exist within the next 4 years. So skipping 2 periods in a row, 95% chance that you're in the early stages of perimenopause, and within about 4 years, you're going to stop getting your period altogether, about that time frame. In the latter half of this phase of perimenopause, the variable ovarian follicles continue to decrease. So keep in mind that pregnancy is actually still possible at this time. Cycles can be as far as 50 days apart. So as you get to the latter part of this transition, right, then things start to kind of spread out. So they're grouped up closer earlier on, and then later on, your periods are going to become further and further apart. And that feedback that I mentioned earlier is less responsive back to the brain. So how do you know if you're in the latter stages of perimenopause? If you have gone 3 to 11 months without a period, and you would be officially in the later phases of perimenopause. And the common symptoms of perimenopause, I'm sure most of us are familiar with that have already been through this if we're past 30 something, 35. Hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, headaches, joint pain, back pain, difficulty concentrating, heart palpitations, and urinary incontinence. Nobody ever likes to talk about that one. Then we move into the next phase. That is actually menopause. So how do you know when you're in menopause? The official start of menopause is actually when a woman has had her final menstrual period. Well, how do we know when it's our final menstrual period if sometimes they're kind of skipping around? Well, you don't really know when you have your final menstrual period, or it's not considered that you're in menopause until you've gone 12 consecutive months without having a period. That is your menopausal stage. From first to last, a solid year, that's menopause. At this point, you're probably very excited because that means no worrying about when you might have to whip out that maxi pad or risk getting pregnant. Or gone are the days of your cramps and headaches and bloating, right? Well, of course, those are all really good things to look forward to. However, the average woman transitions into menopause somewhere between 48 and 52 years of age. Again, depending on your genetics, some of this could also be lifestyle factors such as excess stress, which I was under when I kind of was in this perimenopause phase. And the excessive stress made me kind of not have that extended period of menopausal symptoms, or maybe exacerbated them actually. So high stress can really kind of signal that to turn on, really. And then use of alcohol can do that as well, and the use of birth control. So if you use birth control for a long period of time and then you stop taking it, you might just not get your period again because your body, again, that feedback loop just kind of stops signaling. So as I mentioned, this is the start of menopause. It does not mean that it is at the end of the road. The transition can last 8 to 10 years. As it goes into what's considered the postmenopausal stage. So menopause really is kind of overlapping with your reproductive time and with your premenopause, and then also into menopause or postmenopause. So it kind of overlaps a little bit with a lot of the common symptoms that we typically will see. So at this stage, mainly our ovarian hormones are drastically reducing. Meanwhile, our FSH that I was talking about and another hormone, LH, won't get into all the scientific specifics of it, but those continue to rise to try to balance that feedback loop that's going on between that reproductive system and our brain. Yet the follicles are dying off. So the FSH hormones continue to rise. As they peak, then they will remain there. Meanwhile, estrogen and progesterone are also decreasing. At this time, our testosterone levels begin to decrease as well. Yes, women, we actually do have some testosterone. Some maybe a little bit more than others, but that is actually very useful to us when we talk about our libido, we talk about our motivation, our sex drive. And, it's kind of nice to have those things, orgasms. So those decrease as well. This helps us to experience. So we may experience in this phase sleep disturbances, mostly because of those hot flashes and night sweats, joint stiffness, increased aches and pains, fatigue, decreased motivation, urinary tract infections or bladder problems as well, dryness and pain during intercourse, which is no fun, mood swings and brain fog, low libido I mentioned, and actually loss of lean muscle mass, which is very important for us as we are getting older and there is always that risk of fall. So we want to make sure that we have that lean muscle mass. We have to try to counteract that, which we'll talk about later. So post-menopause. How do you know when you're in postmenopause? This final stage, the ovarians shrink a little and some hormones are actually still released. However, estradiol becomes very low and will stay at this low level for the remainder of our lives. Menopause signs and symptoms can overlap, as I mentioned, our reproductive years, perimenopause, and into postmenopause. And this is what's called that menopause transition, which can actually take between 8 and 10 years. So you got to be able to work through some of these symptoms. This stage was the highest risk for us as well because it will increase our risks of chronic diseases such as various cancers and cardiovascular diseases. The decrease in estrogens and progesterones that once protected us from serious diseases have actually begun to diminish. There also seems to be a correlation in menopause to cholesterol levels, as the good HDL cholesterol is less productive and the bad cholesterol or LDL cholesterol begins to increase or climb. So then you get that risk of your cardiovascular diseases and heart attacks and strokes that can occur. But the good news is that there are some things that you can do to help reduce your symptoms. There are many things that you can do, but here's just a few that most of us already know. Exercise is key. No one likes to hear it, but it really is something that we all need to do. I struggle with it too, being in post-menopause, believe it or not, to have that motivation to keep going. Simple yoga is something that can be done. Going for walks are good, but you really do need some resistance training with bands or with weights to be able to build up that muscle and bone mass for preventing those risks of falls and injuries. It can also, exercise can increase your energy levels. It can reduce your brain fog and just so much more. Increasing your endorphins, which makes you happy. Exercise is really, truly a great thing for that. Best medicine. Eating healthy as well. Choosing organic fruits and vegetables and cutting down or completely cutting out any sugars. No one likes to hear that either. But processed foods too, and I know that's not always easy with everybody's busy schedules, but trying to incorporate a little bit more of fiber into our diet, which is great. We actually need fiber for us women because it helps us to be able to maintain some of that muscle mass. It keeps things moving and flowing. Not only helps with if you're constipated, but it's great for you. Nuts and seeds into your diet can also be used to consume for some good proteins. You want lean proteins like fish and chicken, organic always, if possible. These that contain good fats and omega-3s, good vitamins, minerals. And then reducing stress. So yoga is also a great thing for stress. It gets you moving, clears out your mind, helps you to focus while you're doing it, puts you in some nice poses that will actually challenge your mind and your body. Another thing to reduce your stress is to take warm baths, read a book, do some journaling, play some games with the kids. Anything that we can do to reduce our stress will help to keep those hormones in check. Eliminating any toxins. So I'm sure you've heard around the news lately that plastic bottles are just really bad for you. Anything plastic, really. So you want to look at what you have in your environment in terms of toxic exposure. Definitely remove any of your plastic water bottles. Plastic containers. Do not heat anything up in your microwave in plastic. Remove your cutting boards that are plastic. And try to focus more on looking at the ingredients and having them organic or as the least number of ingredients that you're seeing on your labels as possible to cut back on some of those because they have found like plastics in your brain that just don't go away, causing Alzheimer's and dementia. So that is one thing that should be easy enough for you to remove from your daily lives. And it is increasingly important that we know and understand where we are in our life's journey. With an increase in longevity, we ladies may spend nearly 3 decades in our post-menopause phase. So with a higher risks of chronic diseases and things like that, we want to make sure that we're living a quality life. So let's focus on our health and our well-being, no matter what stage that we're in, and have good quality of life and thrive in our later years. I encourage you all to check out the Limitless Ladies Network website and to sign up for future events. Check out my coaching services and the video library and past recordings in our directory of additional holistic practitioners. You can also check out my book that was recently released on Empower Women Through Wellness and Self-Care on Amazon. Can post that link into the the show notes as well. Sign up for the newsletter at limitlessladiesnetwork.com/sign-up, and follow us on social channels, Limitless Ladies Network LLC, on LinkedIn, Facebook, it's Limitless Ladies Network. On YouTube, it is at Limitless Ladies Network -2, the number 2, and Thrive, THRIVE. And you can also listen on the podcast if you don't have time to watch this recording, which is limitlessladiesnetwork.podbean.com or on Apple as well. Thank you.